He called her forgettable. A ghost in his past. A woman who blended into the wallpaper while he moved on to a brighter, louder life. But he forgot one crucial detail: wallpaper is designed to cover the truth. Tonight, at the most exclusive gala of the year, his forgettable ex-wife is the only person in the world who can see the multi-million-dollar fraud hidden inside a priceless artifact. And when the most powerful billionaire in the city, Julian Roth, publicly declares her his only priority in front of the world's media, her ex-husband will finally learn that the quietest people often hold the deadliest secrets. Serafina Reed measured her life in the quiet hum of archival-grade dehumidifiers and the precise, sterile click of her conservation tweezers. Her world was one of vellum linen rag paper and the scent of acidic decay being patiently held at bay. She was a senior authenticator and conservator in the Special Collections Archive of the New York Metropolitan Library, a position that was to most of the world profoundly anonymous. To the 9 or 10 people on Earth who truly mattered in her field, however, she was a legend. She was the expert called in when Sotheby suspected a 16th century map was a 19th century forgery. She was the one the Getty Museum consulted when the pigment on a lost Renaissance drawing didn't match its supposed origin. Serafina didn't just look at objects, she interrogated them. She understood the chemical language of ink, the cellular structure of paper, the telltale hesitation in a forger's brushstroke, and the microscopic tooling marks left by machines that shouldn't have existed for another 200 years. This quiet, meticulous brilliance was the very thing her ex-husband Marcus Thorne had come to despise. Marcus was a man built of polished surfaces, gleaming shoes, a blindingly white smile, a personality engineered for the boardroom and the cocktail party. He was a senior vice president of acquisitions at a ruthlessly successful private equity firm, Thorne & Associates. He collected opportunities the way Serafina collected facts, with a predatory, single-minded focus. He lived in a world of loud declarations, hostile takeovers, and the ringing bell of the stock exchange. Serafina, he had decided 4 years ago, was a bad investment. The memory of their last conversation in their minimalist steel and glass apartment was etched into her mind. He had stood by the door, his suitcase a gleaming piece of silver Rimowa already packed. "The problem with you, Serafina," he had said, not with anger but with the cool, appraising tone of a man explaining a failed balance sheet, "is that you have no impact. You just exist. You're quiet. I don't know." He'd waved a hand dismissively. "You're forgettable." That word forgettable had been his final gift. He had left her for Chloe Sterling, a woman who was the human equivalent of a champagne supernova, all blinding light, loud pops, and expensive fizz. Chloe was an influencer and socialite whose primary skill was existing beautifully in places where cameras were present. She had, as Marcus often gushed in the society columns, tremendous impact. Serafina hadn't fought him. She had simply meticulously packed her books, her magnifying loupes, and her collection of 18th century botanical prints and disappeared from his world. She had reverted to her maiden name, Reed, and sunk back into the work that had been her passion long before Marcus had found her in a university library and decided she was a quaint, smart accessory. Her work was her fortress. She consulted anonymously for the wealthiest collectors in the world under the simple gender-neutral pseudonym Ethel. They sent her high-resolution scans and material analyses, and she sent back reports that were devastating in their precision. She had quietly saved institutions hundreds of millions of dollars, and she had done it all from a small, cluttered office in the library's sub-basement that smelled of old paper and bookbinding glue. This quiet life was interrupted on a rainy Tuesday by a frantic call from her department head, Dr. Alistair Finch. "Serafina," he croaked, his voice a phlegmy disaster. "I've got the flu. The real sea god kind. I can't possibly go. You have to go for me." Serafina's heart sank. "Go where, Alistair?" "The symposium on 14th century ink gall. I can have my paper ready." No, he wheezed. "Tonight, the Roth Foundation Gala. The unveiling. Serafina's blood ran cold. The Roth Foundation Gala was not just a party. It was the apex of the New York social and financial world. It was a $1 million a plate event hosted by the billionaire technology magnate and philanthropist Julian Roth. It was explicitly Marcus's world. Alistair, absolutely not. Serafina said, a knot of panic tightening in her chest. Send someone from PR. Send anyone. I can't, he protested. This isn't a social call. Roth is unveiling the scepter of Cygnus. His team did the primary authentication, but he's auctioning it tonight for the new university wing, and he's paranoid. He personally requested our best eyes for a final pre-auction sign-off. A formality. He called it a binding one. Serafina, you are the best eyes we have. You're the only one I trust not to be blinded by the spectacle. The car picks you up at 7. It's black tie. Please. The foundation is our biggest donor. He coughed violently and hung up. Serafina stared at the phone. She was a librarian, a scholar. She was a woman of footnotes and appendices. She was not a woman of galas. She felt a wave of nausea. She went home and stared into her closet. It was a sea of sensible wool, corduroy, and cotton. Tucked in the back, however, was one dress she'd bought for a rare faculty dinner years ago. It was a floor-length sheath of dark, heavy sapphire blue velvet. It had long sleeves, a high boat neck, and no adornment. It was, in Marcus's long-ago words, a little funereal. Fine, she whispered to her reflection. She pulled her mousy brown hair back into a severe, intricate chignon, a style that was more practical than fashionable. She wore no makeup save for a light dusting of powder. She looked clean, professional, and completely, utterly forgettable. She had no idea that Marcus Thorne would also be there. His firm had just become a minor corporate sponsor of the Roth Foundation, a move Marcus had pushed for personally. He and Chloe were attending with one goal: to get 5 minutes of FaceTime with Julian Roth himself, a man notoriously insulated from such social climbing. The New York Metropolitan Gallery had been transformed. It was less a museum and more a cathedral of wealth. The entire central atrium, a cavernous hall of marble and glass, was dripping with orchids and lit by the soft golden glow of 1,000 floating candles. A full-string orchestra played on a specially constructed mezzanine. The air thrummed with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and the multilingual chatter of the global elite tech billionaires, old-money aristocrats, senators, and the surgically perfected socialites who orbited them. Serafina felt like a sparrow in an eagle's nest. She clutched her small beaded clutch, the only formal bag she owned, and tried to make herself small. A server offered her champagne. "Just water, please," she murmured. She was here for one reason. She navigated the glittering crowd with an economy of motion that made her almost invisible, her eyes scanning not for celebrities but for the exhibition hall. And then she heard that laugh. It was a high-piercing, bird-like sound engineered to draw attention. "Oh, Marcus, darling, look! That's Senator Warren's wife. Her dresses last season. Can you imagine?" Serafina froze. Her stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. She turned slowly. There he was, Marcus Thorne, looking like he had been sculpted from polished bronze. His tuxedo was custom-made, his smile was blindingly white, and his arm was wrapped possessively around Chloe Sterling's surgically impossible waist. Chloe herself was poured into a dress of glittering, near-transparent gold sequins that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. They were the center of a small fawning circle of admirers. Serafina tried to turn away to melt back into the shadows she preferred, but it was too late. Marcus's eyes, scanning the room for his next networking target, locked onto her. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Then the smile returned, but it was different. It was cruel. He nudged Chloe. "You will not believe this," he murmured loud enough for his circle to hear. He began to walk toward Serafina, parting the crowd like a shark. Chloe drifted in his wake. Serafina stood her ground, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She felt the old familiar shrinking sensation, the reflex to apologize for taking up space. She forced it down. "Serafina," Marcus said, stopping a few feet away. He performed a slow, insulting head-to-toe scan, his gaze lingering on her simple velvet dress with obvious disdain. "Good God! I almost didn't recognize you. I didn't think they let the library staff in through the front door. Are you catering?" His small circle tittered. "Hello, Marcus," Serafina said, her voice even. "Chloe." Chloe looked Serafina up and down, her surgically perfect nose wrinkling. "Babe, who is this?" "I told you," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "This is my ex-wife Serafina, the one I told you about." He leaned in conspiratorially to Chloe but spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The forgettable one." Chloe's eyes widened in theatrical understanding. Oh, right. The one with all the dust. "Still blending into the wallpaper, I see," Marcus said to Serafina, adjusting his diamond cufflinks. "It's a bold choice, I'll give you that. Trying to fade away completely." He looked at her simple clutch. "Where's your little magnifying glass, Sherlock? Find any good clues in the hors d'oeuvres?" Serafina met his gaze. The man she had once loved, the man who had systematically dismantled her self-worth, was standing in front of her looking like a caricature of success, and she felt a dull clinical pity. "I'm here for the scepter, Marcus," she said simply. "I'm working." Marcus scoffed. "Right, the dusty old stick. Of course. Well, that's adorable. Look, we're off to the VIP lounge to have a word with Roth. Try not to, bore anyone to death." He took Chloe's arm and they swept past her, a wave of expensive cologne and mockery in their wake. The encounter left a cold slick in the air. Serafina took a deep, steadying breath, pushing his voice from her mind. He was a ghost. She was here for the living, for history. She continued on to the main exhibition hall. It was packed. In the center of the room, inside a high-security, pressure-controlled glass cylinder, was the Scepter of Cygnus. The crowd around it was a sea of flashing iPhones and murmured awe. It was, Serafina had to admit, stunning. About 3 feet long, it was crafted from a strange, dark, unpolished metal that seemed to drink the light. It was wrapped in intricate gold filigree and capped with a massive uncut gemstone, a deep, milky green emerald the size of a man's fist. Serafina began her work. She didn't just look, she observed. She tuned out the crowd, the noise, the lingering sting of Marcus's words. Her focus narrowed until the only things in the world were her, the glass and the artifact. Serafina moved around the pedestal, her eyes missing nothing. The plaque described the object in breathless prose. The Scepter of Cygnus, c. 400 BCE. Recovered from a private Swiss collection. This pre-Roman artifact, believed to be a ritual object from the lost cult of Cygnus, is a masterpiece of early metallurgy. The staff is crafted from meteoric iron, and the gold filigree in the Scythian style holds the Eye of the Shepherd, a 450-carat uncut emerald of unknown origin. Meteoric iron, plausible. Scythian-style gold, possible. 450-carat emerald, highly improbable but not impossible. Serafina leaned closer. Her pulse, usually so steady, began to quicken. She wasn't looking at the beauty, she was looking at the construction. She analyzed the filigree. It was intricate, yes, but the twists were too perfect. Hand-twisted wire, even by a master, would betray subtle microscopic variations in pressure and torque. This looked like it had been fed through a modern machine die and then distressed by hand. She moved to the meteoric iron staff. The patina, the greenish-black oxidation of age, was too uniform. True meteoric iron, exposed to the elements for 2 millennia, would show chaotic fractal-like patterns of decay, pitting, and crystallization. This looked chemically applied, baked on like a ceramic glaze. But it was the gemstone that made her blood run cold. The plaque called it an emerald. But emeralds, a form of beryl, have a very specific crystalline structure. This looked almost glassy. And the setting, the tiny gold claws that held the great stone in place. Serafina moved to the right, squinting her eyes, focusing on a single tiny point where metal met stone. And there it was. It was microscopic. A tiny, almost invisible mark on the inside of the third claw, a place no one but a madman or a conservator would ever look. It was a perfect concave depression with a burnished rainbow-colored edge. It was a laser soldering mark. A technology that was at most 50 years old. The Scepter of Cygnus. The artifact upon which Julian Roth was staking his foundation's entire reputation, the centerpiece of this million-dollar-a-plate gala, was a fake. It wasn't just a fake. It was an extraordinary fake. A masterpiece of deception designed to fool 99.9% of the experts in the world. The forger had been brilliant, but they had also been arrogant. They had used a modern laser tool to secure the gemstone, probably because a traditional pressure setting risked cracking the massive, worthless piece of— What was it? Serafina looked again, her mind racing. The milky green color, the glassy luster. It wasn't an emerald. It was likely a massive, synthetically grown piece of yttrium aluminum garnet, or YAG, doped with a rare earth element to give it that color. It was a 20th century fraud. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" a pompous voice said next to her. Serafina turned. It was a man in a museum-issued blazer, the curator of the event, Dr. Eris Thorne, a distant and much-loathed cousin of Marcus's, Serafina recalled. He was beaming at the scepter. "Doctor," Serafina said, keeping her voice low and calm, "who did the authentication?" Dr. Thorne bristled. "A consortium, of course, led by Dr. Petrov from the Hermitage and supplemented by our own in-house team. The provenance is ironclad. It was recovered from a private, undocumented collection in Geneva." "Dr. Thorne," Serafina said, turning to face him fully, "I need you to look at the setting. The third claw on the lower left quadrant, the interior face." He frowned. "Ma'am, that's impossible. This case is pressure sealed. We can't." "You don't need to open it," Serafina said, her voice hardening. "Just get a 10x magnification loupe, or even the zoom on a high-resolution camera. Look at the interior of that claw. You will find a laser soldering mark." Dr. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a patronizing sneer. "That is a very serious accusation, and you are—" "Serafina Reed, from the Met's archive. Dr. Finch sent me." "Ah," he said, the sneer deepening. "A manuscript specialist, a librarian. Ms. Reed, with all due respect, metallurgy and gemology are rather different fields. I can assure you the scepter is authentic. Now, if you'll excuse me, the pigment in the uncut emerald is also wrong." Serafina pressed her patience, snapping. "It's giving off a faint, anomalous luminescence under the gallery lights. It's not beryl. It's YAG. The entire thing is a fraud, Doctor. And you're about to let Julian Roth auction it." Dr. Thorne looked genuinely offended. "Ms. Reed, this is neither the time nor the place. You are embarrassing yourself." He turned his back on her and walked stiffly away, signaling to a nearby security guard to keep an eye on the unstable librarian. From across the room, Marcus Thorne watched the exchange. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the curator's dismissive body language and Serafina's tense, earnest expression. He nudged Chloe. "Look at that," he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. "She's been here 10 minutes and she's already bothering the staff, probably complaining that the lighting is historically inaccurate. She has no idea how to be, you know." Chloe laughed. "So awkward. It's kind of sad. Anyway, I think I see Julian Roth heading backstage. Let's move." Serafina ignored the security guard, now hovering 5 feet away. Her heart was hammering. This wasn't just an academic error. This was a crime. She had to get to Roth. Seraphina's mind raced recataloguing every detail. The YAG gemstone, the machine-drawn filigree, the baked-on patina, the laser solder. This wasn't the work of a simple forger. This was the work of a master. A master with access to high-tech equipment. There was only one forger in the world rumored to combine old-world techniques with modern laser technology and synthetic crystals, a ghost-like figure known in the intelligence community as the Alchemist. He had been dormant for a decade. This was his signature. She had to get to Roth. She scanned the room. The billionaire was nowhere to be seen. He was likely backstage preparing for his keynote speech in the auction. Seraphina slipped away from the scepter. The security guard, seeing her move on, relaxed. She walked purposefully, not toward the VIP area, but toward the catering entrance she had noted on her way in. She flashed her simple paper invitation, the one intended for low-level academics, at the guard. "Staff entrance is around the back, ma'am." "I'm not staff," Seraphina said, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm Ethel. I have an urgent message for Ms. Hayes regarding the centerpiece. It's a code alchemist." The guard, a former military man, was trained to recognize names, not faces. Ethel was the anonymous consultant on the Foundation's highest security contact list. Amelia Hayes Roth's chief of staff had drilled the protocol. Code alchemist was the panic word. It meant a catastrophic authenticity breach. The guard's demeanor changed instantly. "This way, ma'am, immediately." He didn't lead her to the catering hall. He led her directly backstage through a labyrinth of black curtains, audio equipment, and frantic stagehands. His hand was on his earpiece. "Dispatch, I have Ethel en route to Ms. Hayes. Situation is code alchemist. I repeat, code alchemist." In the wings of the stage, a tall, severe-looking woman in a black headset spun around. This was Amelia Hayes Roth's chief of staff, a woman known to have more power than most CEOs. Her eyes swept over Seraphina, dismissing the velvet dress and lack of impact in a microsecond. "You're Ethel," Amelia said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "I am," Seraphina said, her voice cutting through the backstage chaos. "And you are 30 seconds away from letting Julian Roth announce a spectacular 21st century forgery as authentic. The scepter is a fake. It's the alchemist's work. I can prove it." Amelia Hayes's face went white. From the stage she could hear the master of ceremonies. "And now the man you've all been waiting for, the visionary founder of the Roth Foundation. Mr. Julian Roth." A roar of applause erupted. Julian Roth, tall and impeccably dressed, walked into the bright white spotlight. "Stop him!" Seraphina commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned even Amelia. "Stop him right now, or this entire foundation is finished." Amelia didn't hesitate. She strode out from the wings, holding up one hand. The applause died into a confused murmur. The music faded. Julian Roth, a man who was never ever interrupted, stopped. He looked at his chief of staff, his expression one of cold, lethal inquiry. Amelia leaned in and whispered something in his ear. The audience couldn't see his face, but they saw his shoulders tense. He gave a curt nod, then turned back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as steel, "please excuse us for one moment. A technical matter with the presentation." He turned and walked calmly off the stage, his pace accelerating as he entered the darkness of the wings. The moment he was out of sight, his mask dropped. "Amelia," he barked, "this had better be the building burning down." "Worse," Amelia said, gesturing to Seraphina, who stood pale but resolute under a harsh work light. "This is Ethel. She's invoking alchemist." Roth's sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto Seraphina. He more than anyone knew what that name meant. Ethel was his secret weapon, the anonymous expert who had via email saved his private collection from 3 devastatingly clever fakes last year. He had tried to identify and hire this person for months, but they had refused, preferring their anonymity. And here she was, a quiet woman in a plain velvet dress. "You're Ethel?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I am Mr. Roth," Seraphina said. "And your scepter of Cygnus is a fake. A modern forgery and a brilliant one, but it's a fake nonetheless. It's YAG, not emerald. The setting is laser soldered. The iron is chemically patinated. The filigree is machine drawn. Impossible, Roth snapped. Petrov's team, the provenance. The provenance was fabricated to match the object, not the other way around, Serafina said, cutting him off. The adrenaline had burned away her timidity. She was in her element. Get a portable XRF scanner, now. Aim it at the gem. You won't find beryllium. You'll find yttrium, aluminum, and garnet. Roth looked at Amelia. Do it. Get Petrov, get the scanner from the lab, and get me the acquisition paperwork. Within 3 minutes, the wings of the stage were a scene of controlled pandemonium. Dr. Petrov, the portly bearded expert from the Hermitage, was rushed in, his face slick with sweat. Mr. Roth, what is this? Who is this woman? This woman, Roth said, his voice dangerously quiet, is alleging your priceless artifact is a piece of trash, and she is about to prove it. A technician wheeled in the portable X-ray fluorescence XRF scanner. They aimed it at the gem through the open side panel of the display case. The machine hummed. On the laptop screen, a graph began to build. And then a massive, undeniable spike. Y. Yttrium 34.8%. Al. Aluminum 21.2%. B. Beryllium 0.0%. Dr. Petrov looked at the screen and his knees literally buckled. He had to grab a stagehand's shoulder to stay upright. It's not possible, he whispered, horrified. It's not only possible, it's a fact, Serafina said. Julian Roth stared at the screen not with panic, but with a terrifying cold fury. He had just staked his entire personal and professional reputation on this night. He had been made a fool of. At that moment, Amelia Hayes returned, holding a leather-bound folder. The acquisition file, sir. Roth snatched it. He flipped to the bill of sale. Seller Ethelred Acquisitions, Geneva. Serafina's blood, which had been pumping with adrenaline, turned to ice. She felt the floor drop out from under her. What is it, Ms. Reed? Roth snapped, seeing the look on her face. Ethelred. Serafina whispered, her voice trembling. Ethelred. That was my ex-husband's nickname. From college. His first company. He called his first... It's him. Julian Roth froze. His eyes, which had been fixed on the damning XRF data, slowly lifted to meet Serafina's. The implications of what she'd just said settled over the small group with the weight of a shroud. Your ex-husband, Roth stated, his voice now terrifyingly soft. The seller is your ex-husband, Marcus Thorne. Serafina breathed, her mind connecting the dots in a sickening high-speed collision. His firm is a sponsor tonight. He's here. I just saw him. He was with Chloe. Amelia Hayes was already on her tablet, her fingers flying. Thorne & Associates. One of their main equity funds is TA Capital Offshore Fund 2. Ethelred Acquisitions is a shell corporation registered in the Caymans, funded entirely by TA Capital Offshore. The picture was complete. It wasn't just a forgery. It was a high-level multi-million-dollar fraud and money laundering scheme. Marcus had used his firm's money to commission a masterpiece forgery from The Alchemist. He'd created a shell company to sell it. He'd used his new position as a foundation sponsor to get the artifact in the door, bypassing the most stringent checks. He'd let Roth's now proven incompetent team authenticate it, thereby giving it a priceless ironclad provenance. Tonight he would have an associate in the crowd buy the scepter at auction for an obscene price, say $50 million. His firm's dirty offshore money would be paid to the Roth Foundation, a legitimate 501c3. The foundation would then, per the consignment agreement, transfer that $50 million, minus their commission to Marcus's shell company, Ethelred Acquisitions. The money would be clean, washed, laundered through the most prestigious philanthropic foundation in the world. And Marcus Thorne would have just turned an illicit $50 million into legitimate taxable profit, all while looking like a hero of philanthropy. He had used Julian Roth as his laundromat, and he had unwittingly brought the one person on earth who could burn him to the ground into the same room. He mocked me. Serafina whispered, the memory of the encounter hitting her with new, sickening force. He was standing right there, laughing at me while he was doing this. Julian Roth's face was a mask of cold, controlled calculation. The initial fury had passed, replaced by something far more dangerous focus. He had been played. He, Julian Roth, the man who built an empire on anticipating every move, had been used as a pawn by a mid-level private equity shark. "Amelia," Roth said, his voice like ice, "get the NYPD's Art Crime Division on the phone. I want them at the service entrance in 10 minutes. No sirens. And get my personal security team. I want them on Mr. Thorne now." He turned to the trembling, ashen-faced Dr. Petrov. "You are fired. Get out of my sight." Petrov stumbled away, moaning. Roth then looked at Serafina. He saw her pale face, her trembling hands, and the analytical fire in her eyes. This was the forgettable woman, the ghost. "Ms. Reed," he said. "Yes," she whispered. "You are, I assume, familiar with the concept of a hostile takeover." "Yes." "Good," Roth said, straightening his tuxedo. "We are about to perform one." He turned to Amelia. "Get me a new speech, and turn my stage microphone on." "Sir?" Amelia asked, confused. "A new speech about what?" "About the truth," Roth said. He then turned to Serafina. "You," he said, "are coming with me." "Mr. Roth," Serafina said, startled. I don't belong on a stage. I'm a librarian." "Nonsense," Julian Roth replied, a thin, dangerous smile touching his lips. "You're the only person in this entire building who isn't a fake. You're Ethel. And it's time the world met you." He offered her his arm. Shaking, Serafina took it. Out in the main hall, Marcus Thorne was getting annoyed. The delay was cutting into his networking time. "What is this amateur hour?" he hissed to Chloe. "How long does it take to fix a projector? My entire bonus is tied to this launch." "Relax, babe," Chloe said, reapplying her lipstick. "You look tense. It's not a good look." At that moment, the stage lights came back up. Julian Roth strode back onto the stage. The murmuring crowd silenced immediately. The change in atmosphere was palpable. The genial host was gone. In his place was a predator. Serafina walked a half-step behind him, her hand still on his arm. She felt the heat of 1,000 spotlights, the pressure of 1,000 pairs of eyes. She instinctively wanted to shrink, to disappear into the velvet of her dress. In the second row, Marcus Thorne saw her. His brow furrowed in confusion. Why was the waitstaff? No, that was Serafina. Why was Serafina on stage with Julian Roth? He glanced at Chloe. "What the hell is she doing?" Chloe, for the first time, looked up from her phone. Her is she?" "Fixing his microphone." Roth stepped up to the podium. He gripped its sides, his knuckles white. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with a cold fury that silenced the room. "Thank you for your patience. We had a technical issue, not with the lights or the sound, but with the very artifact we are here to celebrate." A nervous titter went through the crowd. "I stand here tonight," Roth continued, "as the head of a foundation dedicated to truth, to the preservation of history, and I and my entire team have been the victims of a monumental fraud." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the clicking of press cameras exploding like gunfire. Dr. Eris Thorne in the crowd visibly fainted. "The scepter of Cygnus is a forgery," a reporter from the Times shouted already on his phone. "Yes," Roth boomed, silencing the room again. "It is. A brilliant, expensive, and utterly worthless fake. My experts from the finest institutions in the world were fooled. I was fooled. We were all almost taken for fools. Marcus Thorne had gone pale. His entire sponsorship deal, his entire scheme was based on this auction. This was a disaster. He found out, he hissed, his voice strangled. How could he have found out? But we were not fooled, Roth said, his voice dropping. Because the Roth Foundation and I personally were saved tonight. We were saved by the integrity and the brilliance of one person, a person whose expertise I have been attempting to secure for over a year. An expert who until tonight was known to me only by a codename Ethel. Roth turned and extended his hand toward Serafina. This, he declared to the stunned room, is Ms. Serafina Reed. The spotlight that had been on Roth now swung and centered on Serafina. She stood frozen, her sapphire dress absorbing the light, her face pale but composed. Marcus Thorne's champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the dead-silent hall. "No," he whispered. It's not possible. She's Ethel." The librarian. "No." Chloe was staring, her jaw slack. "Serafina Reed, you said her name was Thorne." "She changed it back." Marcus breathed, his mind short-circuiting. On stage, a reporter shouted the obvious question. "Mr. Roth, what does this mean for your foundation? Your credibility is ruined. And who is this alchemist?" Julian Roth held up a hand. "My foundation's credibility has never been stronger because we value truth above all. As for the forger, the alchemist, that is a matter for the police. But he did not act alone." Roth's gaze swept the room and locked onto Marcus Thorne. This fraud, Roth declared, was not just an attempt to sell a fake. It was a sophisticated criminal conspiracy to launder illicit funds through this foundation. A conspiracy led by the man who funded the forgery, the man who used his position as a sponsor to plant it in our collection, the man who created the shell company that owned it, Mr. Marcus Thorne. The main spotlight, hot and white, swung off the stage and landed directly on Marcus. He was frozen, a grotesque statue of horror. "No!" Marcus shrieked, finding his voice. "That's a lie. It's slander. I'm a victim. I was fooled just like you." "Were you?" Roth asked, his voice a predatory purr. "Were you fooled when your offshore fund TA Capital created Ethelred Acquisitions to be the seller, a name I am told you've used before?" Marcus began to back away, but two large men in dark suits, Roth's personal security, materialized behind him, blocking his path. "Mr. Thorne made a critical error," Roth continued, his voice resonating with cold justice. "He believed that the people who do the real work, the scholars, the researchers, the people who dedicate their lives to substance over style, were beneath his notice. He believed they were forgettable." The word hung in the air. Roth turned and looked at Serafina with unadulterated admiration. He was married to the one person in the world who could have exposed him, and he discarded her. He called her forgettable. "Well, tonight, Ms. Reed," Roth said, turning back to the press, "is the only one we will remember." He then looked directly at the press cameras, his gaze sweeping over the billionaires, politicians, and socialites. "Let me be perfectly clear to everyone in this room, to my partners, to my board, and to the press. The man who did this, the forger known as the Alchemist, and his new partner, Mr. Thorne, have poisoned the wells of history." He paused, then placed a protective, possessive hand on Serafina's shoulder. "Finding these criminals, seeking justice, and cleaning the rot from the art world with Ms. Reed's guidance." Julian Roth declared, his voice a raw promise, "is now my only priority." The room exploded. Not with chatter, but with the blinding flashbang of 100 cameras firing at once. The forgettable ex-wife, the quiet librarian, the woman who blended into the wallpaper, was now inextricably the center of the entire world. As the NYPD art crime unit, now entering from the main doors, began walking toward a sobbing, screaming Marcus Thorne, Julian Roth leaned into Serafina. "Shall we?" he whispered. He guided her off the stage, not through the back, but directly through the center of the crowd, the sea of the global elite parting before them like water. The morning after the gala, Serafina Reed woke up a different person. Or rather, the world had finally woken up to who she had been all along. Her phone, an old sensible model, had been vibrating on her nightstand for 3 hours. When she finally looked at it, it was a cascade of incomprehensible notifications. 842 new text messages, 319 missed calls, 200 new follower requests on the Instagram account she'd made once and forgotten. Her email inbox, usually a quiet place of academic queries, was a digital inferno of press requests. She fumbled for the TV remote. Her face was on every channel. Not just her face, but a stunning candid photo of her on stage, bathed in the spotlight, Julian Roth looking at her with an expression of profound, unadulterated respect. The chyron on CNN read, "The Ghost of the Gala, How One Scholar Uncovered a $50 million Fraud." She walked to her front window. Her small, quiet Brooklyn street was unrecognizable. There were 3 news vans parked on the curb. A handful of reporters were camped out on her stoop drinking coffee, looking up at her building. She was a librarian, a scholar, and she was now apparently the most famous woman in New York. The fallout for Marcus Thorne was not a deluge. It was an extinction-level event. The viral clip wasn't just of his arrest. It was a 30-second loop captured by a Wall Street Journal reporter's phone of his final sputtering confrontation with Serafina just before security had dragged him away. He had lunged, his face purple, and screamed, You did this! You forgettable little bitch!" That single word, forgettable, had become his epitaph. Thorne and associates, in a desperate act of brand survival, held an emergency board meeting at 3 a.m. By 6 a.m. they had issued a press release not just firing him, but condemning his rogue, criminal, and morally bankrupt actions that stand in absolute opposition to the values of this firm. They announced a full internal audit and their complete cooperation with the U.S. Attorney's Office. By noon, the Thorne had been professionally chiseled off the marble lobby wall of his building. His assets were frozen. His partners, the men with whom he'd toasted champagne just hours before, all lawyered up and publicly claimed they too were victims of his masterful deception. Chloe Sterling's agent released a statement that she was in a state of profound shock and heartbreak and was fully cooperating with the authorities. A day later, a TMZ reporter photographed her disguised in a bad wig, boarding a one-way flight to Dubai. Her Instagram, once a monument to a life of curated luxury, was simply gone. Marcus Thorne, the man who had craved impact, had been so thoroughly and publicly erased, it was as if he had never existed at all. 2 days later, a black car, far more discreet than the gala limo, picked Serafina up. It didn't take her to her office. She'd been told to take the week off by a suddenly terrified Dr. Finch, who now spoke to her with a strange high-pitched deference. The car took her to the Roth Foundation building. Not to the gallery, but to the penthouse. The office was less a room and more a section of the sky. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked Central Park, the autumn trees a tapestry of red and gold far below. The silence was absolute. Julian Roth was not sitting behind his massive obsidian desk. He was standing by the window in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her. "Ms. Reed," he said. "Serafina, I trust you are handling the newfound attention." "It's overwhelming," Serafina said, her voice small in the vast space. It felt like standing on Olympus. "Mr. Roth." "Julian," he corrected, motioning for her to sit in one of the simple, pricelessly elegant leather chairs. "I am a man who detests being played. What Marcus Thorne did was not just a crime against my foundation. It was a personal insult. He saw my life's work as a laundromat. He saw your life's work as a doormat. He was wrong on both counts." He sat across from her. "What I said on that stage was not a press stunt. It was a business proposal. I meant every word." "Julian," Serafina said, setting the tea down, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm a scholar. I'm a researcher. I work in a sub-basement. I don't know how to run an institute." "Good," he said with a thin smile. "I'm not looking for another MBA. I have hundreds of them. They are by and large replaceable. What I am looking for is a scalpel. You are the sharpest scalpel I have ever seen. I don't want you to manage a balance sheet. I want you to wage a war." He leaned forward, his intensity a palpable force. "The Reed Institute for Artifact Authentication. That's what I'm calling it. I want you to build it from the ground up. You will have an entire floor of this building. You will design your own forensics lab. You can poach any expert you want from any museum or university in the world, tell me their salary, and I will double it. Your budget is for all intents and purposes unlimited. Your sole mandate is to find the fakes. All of them. In my collection first, I want you to burn it to the ground if it's not clean. Then in my partner's collections. Then in every museum we sponsor. You will be the art world's immune system. You will hunt the alchemist. You will hunt them all. You will be the single unimpeachable source of truth in a world built on lies." Serafina looked at him. This wasn't a job. It was an arsenal. It was a kingdom. He was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, not money or fame, but resources. The power to find the truth. He called me forgettable," she whispered, the memory still a fresh sting. "He was a fool," Julian said simply. He looked at a masterpiece and saw a blank canvas. He didn't understand that true impact isn't the noise you make. It's the foundation you stand on. His was rotten. Yours is bedrock. So Serafina Reed, will you help me clean the rot from my foundation? She looked out the window at the park at the city. She thought of her small dusty office, a place she had used as a fortress. It was time to come out from behind the walls. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I will." 1 year later, Dr. Serafina Reed, she had with Roth's funding completed her long-delayed dissertation, stepped out of her car in Geneva. The Reed Institute was no longer a proposal. It was the most feared and respected entity in the art world. Her year had been a blur of building. She had hired a dream team of experts, a stoic former Mossad agent who specialized in tracking stolen art, a brilliant eccentric chemist from MIT who could date pigment down to the month, and a young bulldog-like historian who could trace provenance through the most obscure family records. Her lab on the 50th floor was a masterpiece of technology that made the FBI's art crime unit drool. Serafina herself was transformed. The funereal velvet dress was long gone. Today she wore a sharp custom-tailored cashmere suit, her hair pulled back in the same severe chignon. But it was no longer a shield. It was a statement. She had not become loud, but her quietness now had weight. When she spoke in a boardroom or an auction house, people stopped breathing to listen. Her partnership with Julian was the bedrock of her new life. It was one of deep, profound, and utterly professional respect. He trusted her judgment implicitly, not just in art, but in people. He'd begun to use her as his truth detector in his other businesses, flying her to board meetings. "What's your read, Serafina?" he'd ask. And she would reply, "He's all patina Julian, no substance." He always listened. Her first 6 months had been a quiet rampage. She'd identified 3 cornerstone pieces in Roth's own collection as fakes. He had, without blinking, had her issue a press release announcing the findings, a move that stunned the art world and cemented the Institute's ruthless integrity. And now she was in Geneva. She had a lead. A new undiscovered Da Vinci sketch had surfaced, and it was being brokered by a very private, very secretive dealer. The chemical signature on the ink, analyzed from a high-resolution scan, had all the hallmarks of the alchemist. She was finally closing the net. She returned to New York a week later, successful. The Da Vinci was a fake. The dealer was in custody and he was talking. She was one step closer to her true target. She was in her office, a beautiful light-filled space of glass and old books overlooking the park. Her assistant, a bright young art history grad, knocked and entered holding a small stack of mail. "Dr. Reed, the files from Geneva are digitized, and this came." She placed the mail on Serafina's desk. Most of it was official. One envelope, however, was thin, cheap, and addressed in a shaky, familiar hand. The return address was from the Allenwood Federal Correctional Institution. It was from Marcus. Serafina's heart gave a single hard thump. She sat for a long moment staring at his familiar, arrogant handwriting. Her assistant quietly left the room. The silence of the penthouse office was a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. She thought of the man she had married, the charming, ambitious man who had wooed her in the university library, who had said he loved her brilliant, quiet mind. Had any of it been real, or had he just seen her as another quaint asset to acquire? She picked up the letter. It felt thin and pathetic. She knew with the same certainty she had about the scepter exactly what was inside. It would not be an apology, not a real one. It would be a performance. It would be a torrent of excuses. It was the market, it was his partners. It was the pressure. It would be a river of manipulative nostalgia. Remember that weekend in the Hamptons? Remember how we talked about building an empire? Then it would pivot to blame. It was her fault. If she had been more supportive, if she had been more of a presence, if she hadn't been so forgettable, he wouldn't have been driven to such extremes. And finally it would come the desperate, groveling plea. He had learned his lesson. He was a changed man. He had found God. Could she please just write a single letter to his parole board? Just say something on his behalf. "You're so respected now, Serafina. They'll listen to you. You're my only hope. I always knew you were special. I always loved you. I was just a fool." She held the unopened letter. Opening it even just to read his pathetic, predictable words would be giving him one last fraction of her time. It would be an act of conservation, preserving a toxic artifact that deserved to be destroyed. It would be letting the ghost back into the room. Her work was about preserving the truth. And the truth was this letter, and the man who wrote it did not matter. Serafina Reed stood up. She walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder beside her desk, a machine she used for destroying sensitive documents. With a cool, clinical precision, she fed the unopened letter into the slot. The machine cutting Marcus Thorne's final desperate words into 1,000 irretrievable, forgettable pieces. She turned back to her desk. She picked up the important file, the one marked Alchemist Geneva. She put it in her briefcase, adjusted the collar of her silk blouse, and walked out the door, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. She had a plane to catch and a criminal to find. And just like that, the woman he called forgettable became the only one anyone remembered. Serafina Reed proved that value isn't measured in the noise you make, but in the truth you hold. She didn't need to be loud to be heard. She just needed to be right. Her arrogant ex-husband wanted the spotlight, but she became the light, a beacon of truth that exposed the fakes in the art world and in her own life. What did you think of Serafina's story? Have you ever felt underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and vindication, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories every single week. Don't miss what's coming next.